What is your identity?
Well, I think that we have. That's a good question, by the way. Not. I think that the fact of our identity is sort of beyond our conscious understanding. There's a thing in psychology, and I don't recommend psychology, as like a life pursuit or your one guiding light or anything like that. But it's called the internal family model, and I think that's about as close as science has gotten to understanding what it is. It's if I try and go at the beginning. I mean, we have the ego, and we think this is ourself. It's not that the ego isn't the self; it's only a part of the self, and so I think that we live in this condition where our first step is we have to understand what are the real conditions. Unfortunately, it would seem to me that almost nobody comes to this basic, original sort of apprehension, which is understandable. I mean, almost everybody is sort of asleep or corrupt or too broken or and then I think, there are obstacles to this. There is an enemy, and that enemy is likewise subdivided into so many smaller entities that it can, and then amassing again into egregores. But I think somehow, the internal family model postulates that there are many sub identities, and this too isn't all that helpful. But right at that first step, you start to it sort of forces one to consider the idea that maybe we are not, hermetically sealed off from everything else. We know this is true in terms of our biology, but we're a long, long ways away in any sort of scientific sense of understanding the total ecology that we're embedded into. Um, how's that for an opener? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so a couple things. Can you explain to people what an egregore is?
Yeah, I can try. I think it's there seems to be two sort of schools of approach on it, where one is implying some sort of agency, like a demon, like an angel, or some sort of non-human intelligence being involved in the aggregation of, again, identities, which are really just people. If we that was a great way to open, because we can spin around this thing so much. But the other idea about the egregore is that it's just kind of happenstance, and that maybe it's even functioning more off of like inertia or social engineering. And of course, the two don't need to be separated. You could have both. And so an egregore is really just kind of like a hypothetical or invisible entity that's aggregated up out of sort of the agency or the consciousness of many, many, many people.
A few things striking me there. I think that the body of Christ is sort of like the positive version of this, uh, and in so many ways, the like the battle is not against flesh and blood is a scripture people like to quote. Um, Going through some stuff in my personal life that is makes that really hard to live out in a just practical way. It seems very clear that it's the person right in front of you, um, and yet when you get down to it, like even the way that you think about yourself and the like, why did I do that? Or, the shame that you carry with you from, whatever transgressions perceived or actual that you've committed in your life. It's like, uh, these things bend and warp you uh, into those patterns. And so I think like the egregore of the body of Christ is like a healed reality. And it just touches right back on what you were saying. This is why we're talking about the egregores, is like, that's the way that your identity takes place anyway. And so you can either be ignorant of that and sort of participate within the aggregation of the spirit of something that you don't choose, or you can choose to submit to something of a higher spirit or a higher nature or something like that. Jordan Peterson does a lot of really good work on this sort of thing, and his friend Jonathan Pageau is fond of talking about these egregores. So I have some familiarity with them, but Peterson brings to it that psychological background and talks about the way that your mental health isn't your own. It's not hermetically sealed, like you said, and so it's actually really essential that you have community to sort of participate within, in order to allow that community to participate within you. And the balance and structure, I think, of other people helps to level out some of the things, like when you're feeling down and you have a buddy who just will be there with you, but then he'll be like, no, that's not true, and you got to cut that out because it's not productive. It's not helpful. It's just not true, but you got to have the balance, because if it's just you hermetically sealed, then you're going to turn to SSRIs or whatever to try to get your brain to shut up. And that's not a good plan.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm glad you brought the body of Christ up. It's stunning to me that, here we are 2,500 years later or what have you, a few thousand years. And you see this all the time with so-called, science or cutting edge or tech or what have you, that nothing has really changed. I mean, the fact that that guys like yourself can sort out the meaning of that idea, the body of Christ, within what would seem to me anyway to be one of the most kind of congested and complicated and generally degraded social political situations maybe of all time. That alienation that I think you were maybe alluding to there it's profound, and it's just a magical thing that the truth seems to, the way it works, it just persists. It is there for the taking all the time. And yeah, I think that you can't quite get to it unless you have something like grace. It must be in operation here, where if you're having a hard day and you're that buddy who can shore you up is not around, maybe you make it through, or you meet someone else comes into your life that that somehow provides the space or the information or the perspective for that, all those maybe millions, I don't know, many pieces to kind of fall back into place. But yeah, it's truly a magical thing, and the magical, if you will, aspect of it, this fact that it's sort of beyond any one or any institutional sort of description is just always going to be the case. And so on the one hand, it's difficult, but its very structure and nature seems to also make it impenetrable. It's as if the enemy cannot actually win.
Yeah. Actually, that's funny you mentioned that. So I was thinking about Crowbar, which is a real uh, mind bending and numbing psychofugue, is one of the words used to describe it. And it's excellent and gripping. And I heard you in the process of writing it say that you wanted it to, you thought that it would yank readers forward. And I can attest to the yanking. I couldn't put it down. And one of the things that I picked out, and this is sort of abstract, but like uh, cubes play a role in the story. And the idea of a cube is that it's like three-dimensional, and there's some ties to like Saturn and Mecca and Satan and all of these things. And one of the things that I was thinking is like, I wonder if Satan feels the weight of time. Like, I have a hard time thinking of Satan even as a personal or like an entity, even because of being Western, I guess. I don't know. But to the extent that I can, I could imagine him uh, in this place of like what you just said. He can't win. He can't win, and he's trapped in this. There's an impending nature to his downfall. And so, anyway, I don't think it's giving away too much to say you play around with time a little bit in your book Crowbar, and I don't know how much of this was even intentional, but it was just sort of an abstract correlation I made that like evil has an expiration date, and that's something that Christians have believed for a long time. But like I think that's one of the parts of the revelation of God and Jesus that has made such a lasting impact. It's like that. That seems to me to be one of the more important things that people talk about in the New Testament is like the hope that you have. And it is so hopeful that it affects your current state. I don't know if you have anything on that.
Well, I mean, I think you're the first person to, in any of these chats, to, make those associations with, the cube and time and the various, like Mecca, Sabbateans and others have Saturn, you mentioned. It does seem, there's a guy on X who's sort of a pal of mine, and we've done a little collaboration before. I think you pronounce his name Seele. It's Seele. And if you want to go really far, like deep into these, he just did a thing with Pajot, actually. Where they're up on this whole other level, kind of describing some of the structural or symbolic elements of reality. And, as a novelist, I mean, or, writer in general, I guess, my concerns are a little on a slightly different track than that. But I've benefited a lot from Seele and his cohort, Matryoshka Monarchist. You'll see them, running around on X, and I think they have a podcast now called Reveille, which I haven't had time to check into, but I'm sure is fantastic. But yeah, as a novelist, you have a lot of latitude with how you present these things, and I think that you're on the right track, in my opinion, in terms of how you associated time in particular to certain shapes. I mean, we have this like fact of linearity where despite how much how many mushrooms or LSD or whatever we do, even if you go into like really intense and like righteous spiritual practices, pilgrimage or Hesychast is what the Orthodox call like their version of meditation. And you can do this for hours, and you will feel like the peeling away, or kind of, it's not really unpleasant, but it's sort of dissolving of, your the ego thing. And as well, you can feel these alterations in time. I surmise that this is still the way forward for humans to kind of come away with something like information. But the other element that's at play in the novel, and that people might be interested in checking out, is the Gnostic idea, which is kind of, it can be a bit of a rough go to, in my opinion, in my experience, to kind of get around what its origins were and all of the various scare stories about it, and then understand how this, I guess, we'll call it a theology or a belief system, winds up weirdly kind of morphing and playing out, in Europe and the Middle East, and America for sure. And it presents a thing that doesn't seem to be we're not really able to dismiss it, other than maybe through practice and experience. You can kind of begin. I think there's a place where, and your listeners are probably aware that Gnosticism in general, in a real reductive way, seems to postulate this idea that we are sort of in a cage, and there are these archon entities that are somehow intermediate to the true God, and they kind of wrestled power away. And like in an absolute ontological, like theological fact sense, this doesn't actually really pencil out. But in the sense of your experience, or the way that the world is run, all of a sudden it becomes kind of a useful lens that you can overlay onto things, and like the Egregore, and start to have a different, maybe, apprehension of the total context. This, back to this identity situation that we're in. I wanted to say one more thing, then I'll shut up, is the Gnostic, the gnosis thing. I mean, I'm not a priest, but my experience has been that there's kind of a limit to how much like knowledge is really useful. Like loving. You said you have a child now, and you're a first time dad. I mean, I'm not trying to project this onto you, but my experience with fatherhood was kind of like how the old timers said. I mean, my conception of what mattered, and my value, and how long I needed to, be the star or whatever, be important. All of that stuff just completely dissolved into a whole other layer of understanding. So this idea of gnosis, or knowledge, we have a weird relationship with it. I mean, we could talk about it more, but I have found that it's tempting for me, to always, and for probably a lot of people. I mean, especially now with AI, or the ability to use pretty advanced technology, and you see this on X a lot. It's like, oh, I found the answer. I found the answer. I found the answer. And sometimes you do. Like, that's the odd part about it. We have to have this. There's this quality, this spiritual quality, that the old Catholics and the old Orthodox talked about quite a bit, and it was just discernment. And it didn't mean necessarily like discerning between red or green or something. It was a spiritual level of discernment, where you really don't have some like philosophical framework or system that you can refer to all the time. You need something more like a theological system. And that's kind of how I relate to all of this stuff, in fact. But certainly gnosis and what have you.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That was a really exciting direction, I feel like. One of the things that I think particularly marks Gnosis out is like the disdain for the body. I think that's some of what you were saying with the cage. I think they equate those things like humanity is dirty and lower, but then you can break out of that through Gnosis. At least that's a cursory, probably straw man understanding of Gnosis. But but I've identified some of that in like in Christianity, where people are, they'll go through the New Testament epistles and say, well, John is talking about this or Paul is talking about that, and he's sort of combating these Gnostic teachers that were coming in and taking this story and putting it in their lens. And so that just means it's automatically bad because the apostles are condemning it. But one of the things that happens with that is then you start to miss when it comes up in your own system. And so I think that the denial of I mean, like we all just have bodies, and our desires and our psychology and our um, the physicality that we bring into life. We commit sins with our bodies for sure, but they are the only path towards good as well. And so it's a very strange thing where I think, at least in some form of Protestant or evangelical theology, there is a disconnect between the body. Like Catholics have a great theology of the body. I think theosis is a good example of Orthodox's more healthy relationship with the body, the embodiment of the soul, and its relationship with God. And so then you said at the end, like, you need a theological framework. I think what that really spoke to me is like you need to be able to connect with something on a God level, and not simply at a rational level or a systematic level. And when you are stuck in things like systematic theology, like I'm sure probably everybody, like every group that thinks something's important or calls something God or a higher power or whatever, probably has some form of this Gnostic spin on their system, where the knowledge or the rationality, the logic of it is sort of unassailable. And yet, in practice, you're disconnecting your soul from your body. And so then, anyway, that's what I heard when you were saying that, is like, I think it is so important to remain embodied. And that's one of honestly, like, this is a little shoehorn, but King of Dogs was in many ways that for me. You dealt with the spiritual elements of evil, even just life, right? Life entails evil and good and honor and dishonor and truth and lies and these things. And you dealt with it in a way through Grayson, the main character, that I felt like was extremely embodied. It's an extremely physical book. I was laughing because I felt like I listened to a few of your interviews, and muscular was I listened to one guy review it, and he used the word muscular or muscularity about your writing. And it's just funny because it's like, I don't know, I think you have a literary flair, and yet I totally understand what they're saying. Like, it's very visceral. I think that means like embodied, right? And so anyway, that's where I went with that.
Yeah, well, thanks for saying that. I really appreciate it, and it's really gratifying, to write a book like that and then see it, like, back to this idea of time, kind of bobbing out on the ocean of time or whatever, and people pick it up and they experience it, and it's not that I've moved on at all. It's something other than that. It's just very gratifying to know that it's of value to people. And your comments there remind me of this there's an author. He's not very well known. He was some sort of big time scholar, and his last name is Onions, Onians. And I got his book actually after writing King of Dogs. And I forget what it's called, but it's something like the history of European thought. Maybe it's just the history of European thought. But anyway, his thesis is sort of that the ancients had some different relationship with the mind and the body, and it's really not a great book. I if you can get it, for a couple bucks or something, it's worth looking at. But it's kind of a dry read where essentially he postulates this idea that the body isn't, and I agree with all this stuff. I mean, the body is not separate from the mind, and most of our ideas about how we think are in some way this sort of circular, reflexive, or reflective, of observations that we as embodied creatures have about those bodies. And I know that, like, even as I say that, it's like, well, how is that really useful? Well, I mean, it was useful to me to ponder because it starts to, we have this issue, I think about this a lot, where there are all these sort of seemingly subversive elements, and maybe there always have been. But we, like solvents dissolving these things, we almost seem to sort of need something like that. Yet it's also terrifying, and yet it can also be exploited by like corporeal, material enemies, political enemies, or the ultimate enemy for sure. And so we kind of, I whenever I think of this stuff, I sort of arrive back to this place where, well, probably this is just the experience of life as such. I mean, if it wasn't any different for the ancients, and it's still this way now, it could actually be, and it probably is, that the relationship that they had with whatever this kind of circular experience was between their minds and their bodies, maybe a pure version of that, is more useful or is more advantageous in terms of getting close to God, which is, as far as gnosis or theological sorts of prescriptions, this is the closest that I've been able to get where, or maybe the most reliable observation that I have is like getting closer to God. If you can do that, just keep doing that. You're probably going the right way, whether it's, this bit of Protestant or this bit of Orthodoxy or who knows what, all of that stuff. And, even the church fathers advise against, at a certain point, this type of total submission to the book, the clergy, what have you. And no one wants to hear that because you have a difficult time already, like kind of, if you will, rounding people up and saying, hey, God's over here and we can kind of help you get close to him, or you can have this experience of community in the church. There are problems, like the church is not perfect. Well, all of a sudden that becomes like this management issue. But so be it. It doesn't change how things are like on the ground for the father or the mother that's out there right now trying to raise children who can survive. But in terms of, I'll say one thing about the book and then turn it back to you, Ian. I didn't really consciously think about making King of Dogs tying, maybe I did, it's been a little while, but tying it so much to the body. But that could just be the fact that like most of my experience as a kid was related to athletics, and then a lot, a big portion of my adult life too has just been realizing over and over again that the the care for yourself, for your body, you can take it too far, and there are plenty of examples of this. For whatever reason of luck or grace, I had never had this problem exactly where well, I mean, maybe it's due to competition. I don't know, because I never really did things just purely for like aesthetics, and that's nice. You can look good because you're in better shape or what have you. But I I have found that competition, like physical competition against others or myself or some standard, has generally been very helpful. And so, yeah, I'll kind of leave it there. I mean, it's probably just a lot of that. And I mean, we're talking about decades and decades and decades of this, where I started at like third grade. So it's probably just bleeding in, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Right. What right. Um,
Right.
I think that, uh, I'll let's shift into some more stuff about writing. I I so enjoy the philosophical conversation. The One of the things I really noticed in your book and in catching some interviews in preparation for this, I heard that you had some experience or education in screenwriting, and I thought that the way that you captured the setting of every scene was so excellent. I think that it's like in a book, you have chapters, but King of Dogs has 6 chapters, I believe, and they're long chapters with many scenes, and so the importance of the way that you formatted it, I think, like like a huge linchpin for the story is that you can have distinct and well presented scenes, and I say well presented because through text, you were able to communicate almost the cinematography of King of Dogs. And there are some famous writers that may or may not go on Joe Rogan, who famously participate in the screenwriting of their uh, novels. And there's a little bit of a cheapness to that where it's like, and I wrote this scene and then I got to rewrite it for the show, but there wasn't that much different, because it's sort of like written for TV. And that's whatever it is. That's a hustle. But I think in your presentation, it felt very much more like something you'd watch at South by Southwest and might not make that much at the office, but it certainly is excellent and classical. And so I just wanted to put that to you in the form of this question. Uh, is How does your experience with that screenwriting and maybe like the modern uh, era of visual storytelling factor into your writing and sort of the way that you approach it?
Okay. So I go back to the history, I guess, again. I remember when I very first had the idea, hatched the notion to write a novel. I sat down and I wrote a few pages, and it was pretty soon. Maybe I wrote a scene or two or something. And I realized that I had absolutely no idea how to do this. I had no conception, and I sat there for a couple weeks and just kind of marveling about how can this be the case that I've read. I read a lot as a kid. I mean, a lot. And when it came time that I had this idea to do a novel, and then it it finally caused me to do something that probably changed my life for the better, or at least put me on a path, which was, instead of reaching for a novel, I got the movie Chinatown. I think I rented it or bought it or something. I must have bought it. And what I did was I took out a pad of paper and I just went through that movie, probably 8 or 10 times. And I just tried to understand what was going on here. And so eventually I parsed it out in my own way. And then I wrote that novel, and, it was okay. It was the first, I think, full thing that I had written. And then about a year later, I had gone back to college at that point after taking maybe 8 or 10 years off. And I had the idea, well, I'm just going to finish this degree. This was back in 2002. My dad had advised me, like, just don't worry about what it's in, just get the degree, and then you can deal with the aftermath later. Maybe not the greatest advice, maybe okay, I don't know, but I thought, okay, I'll do an English degree because I love books. And I realized even then, like, well, probably doesn't have a lot to do with work or making money or any of that, but I'll do it. I did it, and along the way, you have these electives, and I realized at some point, I can take all these film classes, and I wound up getting a film minor. But the way that I did it was I just kept taking this one screenwriting class. I would take it every term because you could, and the teacher was pretty cool. And the first term was like mind-blowing. It really was a little period of time, maybe one of the few periods of my life where something like school or formal education made a big difference. So this guy, his name was Charles Deemer, and he, not a big deal, but he had some movies made of his screenplays, and he was like a sort of a Portland, this was at Portland State University. He was like a guy who produced a lot. I mean, he had novels and screenplays and poetry and all sorts of stuff, and had this sweet little gig teaching screenwriting. So I wrote the screenplay in that first term, and I turned it in, and he said, I've been doing this for like 25 years, and you're the only person who ever actually completed a screenplay, which struck me as odd. Like, nobody else thought to just write the whole thing, because so I went and took this class like 9 times or something, and I wrote a screenplay every semester. So to try and bring this back to your question, King of Dogs is actually written in a unique way that doesn't really pop out, I think, to readers, and doesn't even pop out to like writers that much, because it's pretty inside, as they say. But essentially it does adhere to like a pretty formal or standard story structure, and you'll learn along the way. Like, you can start with 3, you have beginning, middle, and end. You can move to 7 points or plot points, or 12. There's versions that are 36. And so it gets out of hand really quick. Like, well, how useful is this? But when you write, well, another thing that guy, Charles Deemer, that I'd written maybe 5 or 6, and at a certain point he said, I'm impressed with your output and stuff, but he's like, have you ever thought maybe you're a novelist and not a screenwriter? And I thought, well, as a matter of fact, I have thought that. And I don't know if he meant that as like a compliment, or maybe some sort of or directional advice or something, but I guess what I'm trying to get to is, within a screenplay, the whole project of screenwriting as such is really weird, and I don't think it really is all that useful anymore. If you just want to write screenplays and make money, or if you're one of these guys like Nick Pizzolatto who was able to really carve out something like, well, this is a Nick Pizzolatto piece. Like this is name insert some the other great screenwriters or what have you. Well, that's great. That's probably really satisfying, and there's a lot of space for you to operate. Um, with a novel, you can literally do anything. I mean, I can write a novel about that's actually a movie that's encased inside a dream that's also laden with some sort of retelling of the story of Christ or whatever. I mean, I could do absolutely anything. It's just down to um, your command over the craft and probably a few other things like your character, what have you. So King of Dogs is pretty formal or standard in its structure, um, just with respect to how the story is told. Like you, the reader, I went to great lengths to kind of make sure that you felt like I was holding your hand. Like I'm not not holding your hand in a condescending way, but like I'm not gonna betray you. We're gonna go to some odd or dark places and see some hard stuff, but I'm not gonna let you down at the end of this book. And that, I hope that people find that to be true. Now with Crowbar, of course, it's almost the opposite. It's almost like I'm, once again, I'm asking you to trust me, but this is going to be very hard. I'm going to actually just try and put the reader through the experience of like being psychically fractured or experiencing psychosis to suggest, bigger things. And that turned out to be the interesting thing is that the structure of the story, which Aristotle is famously, like, he's the guy who gets the credit for this. He put out this idea, well, the next scene is really just, it has to necessarily be dependent on what's happening in the current scene, and on and on and on. It's all this sort of logical series of circuits, and that you can compress and compress and compress into, again, beginning, middle, and end, beginning, middle, and end, beginning, middle, and end, over and over and over and over and over. And at the end, what happens is, with every story, the ending is not actually true. There is no such thing as like, it can be satisfying on certain emotional or psychological or informational cathartic sort of levels, but you close the book and you go back to your own life. And so I wanted to try with Crowbar to, I guess maybe the hope, and then I'll shut up, is like, I thought that King of Dogs was hopefully so careful to respect the reader and deliver them out into a place that I thought was rewarding. And then read, most people will read that book first and then go to Crowbar. And so I'm asking them in many ways, even though the book it's like you say, this psychogenic fugue. I mean, it's much more like a David Lynch movie than it is like a Stephen King novel or something, where oh yeah, I know what happened, and here's the synopsis. Part of walking away from Crowbar is you don't really know what happened. You may have a pretty darn good idea, and that's great, because it is there for you to have that. But the story is so much bigger, once again, to this ending idea, that when I'm just asking people to sort of have faith. I'm going to come back, we'll do another one, and the world that we've kind of situated here will expand once again, and your perspective will expand, hopefully, and mine too.
Yeah. I'm sort of relieved to hear you say that. I was working through, like, how am I going to talk to this guy? What am I going to say? And uh, I feel like it's like you said, fractured psychology or psychosis was an experience that you wanted to share. Maybe, I don't know, from personal experience, but through the book with your readers. It's like you did that, and in such a powerful and compelling way. But then walking away from the book, I'm like, man, I'm glad it's short because I'm definitely going to read it again. I read it 2 times, and I was like, man, there's still like uh it's like an experience or something where uh it's very rereadable, it's enjoyable, and at the same time I feel like it's almost like history in some sense. Like, you get to be transported, but almost without any of the, like, not it's not independent from these things. Like, there's a lot of 80s pop culture references which I don't get, but I understand that it's a reference to a specific era, and so it's like fleshed out with that, and so you know where you are, and yet you are seeing it in a very, well, again, a very like embodied way, corporeal sort of amygdala experience of the 80s, where maybe now we have this, well, this is what happened in the 60s, this is what happened in the 70s, this is what happened in the 80s sort of history, which is really just a myth, and not in the sense that it's not true entirely, but it is sort of, maybe, I don't know, it seems like an egregore of ideas about what happened. And so what you do, I feel like, is bust free from all of that and sort of pull out some threads that are, associated with maybe like conspiracy theories, or, MK Ultra and CIA and all of this stuff that, oh, well, we pretty much know what the CIA is for. They do good stuff to bad guys, or they hurt the bad guys in foreign territory, and that's what they do. And I think a lot of people have been breaking free from that conception recently. At least the people that watch the same algorithm stuff that I watch. But it's like, I think you did that in a very impressive way through a novel. With threads to continue pulling, and so I'm excited to hear about returning to the story, because I just want to say, like, it is complete, like, for anybody that's going to go read Crowbar, it's like, it's complete. It is a unit, but also, like any story, it just keeps going on. And the way that you look at it, you could say, well, that's the first part of this story when the next one comes out, or you could say, uh, like, that's a story. It has something of an ending, and yeah, I want people to approach it with anticipation, because you won't be let down, even if it doesn't fit into the typical narrative or mythological structures that they expect.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, I'm again gratified to hear it. I think that there is a core, you're right, in that there's a heart. I mean, we started this out with a prayer, and so I mean, you and I see eye to eye on at least that much. And so in some ways, I'm not trying to be like too self-aggrandizing or anything. I'm just telling you like how it is. Um I think in that sort of experience of psychosis, or what they used to call in the MK Ultra era psychic driving, where essentially these scientists, were government funded in order to break people's minds. This this seems to operate in some way as a sort of kind of a cleaner example, or a isolated example of something that's, I don't think, any longer isolated. I don't think that the experience of being fractured by technology, by enemies, foreign and domestic, this is broken containment. And that's why, the self-aggrandizing part, I guess, is one, I'm clinging to God, and to the extent that I can do that, the reader can come along with me, then that's just trying to share my experience, I suppose, of what that means. And then trying as well to, and you hear this a lot, how like historical novels are really about the time period in which they're written. So I'm writing about the 80s, but I'm really writing about now. And I don't know how true that is for every little historical novel project in the world, but it's certainly pretty true in the case of Crowbar. I mean, we're living in maybe not the total fruition or final end state of that particular weird period of time. Say, like, because it's before the 80s, and if we pick up at about 1946 or something, and then proceed up and see, well, wow, this is what all of the statecraft, all of the technology, all of the social upheaval sort of winds out in this odd place called the 80s, which I did live through. I was a kid. But then that, winds up into this, where we're arguably even, I mean, I don't know who could argue at this point. Once again, I lived through the 80s. It was, in many ways, very weird, but also we had a sense that there was a country, there was an America, and even though nefarious actors and whatnot, I remember my dad pretty clearly saying to me or implying that he knew or believed, he was of the belief that everything that went down around JFK was not official. So maybe that opened up some doors for me to be able to speculate fairly early. I was probably like 14 or something, where he wasn't like overbearing about it. But he just said, yeah, that probably wasn't the case. He didn't say it was the CIA along with Cubans and Lansky or whatever. He was content with that. But I mean, that was the reality, is like, so my dad knows that things are not the way that the newspapers purport them to be. What does that mean, for a little kid? Well, it wasn't that bad, because everything else, not everything else, but the social fabric was sort of still intact. And so now, my experience, I marvel at guys your age, like the psychic and mental fortitude that maybe you all have had to, just kind of man up and weave in, because anyway, from my point of view, it's pretty rough out there right now. It's gone beyond any sense of community or nationhood or what have you, to a truly like dog eat dog, just, yeah, man, it sucks, like, deal with it sort of attitude. And so that's I'll pass it back to you, but in some way it's like maybe incumbent upon guys my age to do our best to try and offer, for folks such as yourself, or readers who are interested in it, like some sort of observation, simply that you're not alone. You're not alone in this experience. I'm not alone in it. I've had a little bit more time. Maybe I had a little bit easier time, in fact, of coming around. I don't know. It's not really a competition in any sense, but at this stage in my life, given this is what I've spent my time getting good at, this is what I have to offer back in some sense. So it's been, again, super gratifying to realize that you could write a book like Crowbar, and even though, as you say, many of the the little inside bits or cultural references slide by. Some sort of core, at least, is being communicated.
So one of the questions I had to open with, we skipped it because we were just talking about other more fun things, was do you think of yourself as an artist? And I'll ask that at the end of this, but I just want to contextualize. I've just been thinking that the time that we live in is, um, we see the urban monolithic culture sort of overtaking uh, the social fabric. So it's rather than an actually cohesive community that's sort of uh, united around really anything. It's sort of a paving over where everyone watches the same shows and everyone uh, sees the same TikToks and everybody sort of plays nice because we all have a shared um, sort of experience, which is strange because it doesn't actually work. Like the more thoughtful or independent people end up being way out on the fringe in this extremely siloed algorithm. And I think that it becomes extremely difficult then to sort of hop from silo to silo. Like, oh, you still think like we landed on the moon? You know, like that's just a silly example of like maybe we did, maybe we didn't, but there's some people that definitely think we did, and people that don't think that are wrong. You know, like that's the psyop of conspiracy theories being they're all wrong, and once something gets labeled that way, then you can't listen to people that don't think that it's wrong. And uh, I wanted to ask about, you know, if you think that you play that role in society as an artist, and what you said just now seemed very interesting because one of the things that you think that you're doing is contributing back to society the way that you see it, like history, your life, people, these types of things. And uh, I think that the subjective is so important in our world today because we're moving towards, you know, some sort of like uh, analogy to the Tower of Babel with AI. Just technological supremacy over nature that obviously I just don't think that that's legitimate. Maybe it is powerful and maybe things will happen because of it, but I don't think that it's totally legitimate. And so, with that, famously in the story, the language is confused. And I think that's a bit of what you see with the silos. Like, we don't know how to talk to each other. There actually is no social fabric. So, unless everybody gets on board with what is typical or prescribed to them as the culture, then, and thereby submitting their, you know, sort of like uh, dismissing or removing their subjectivity, then we won't be able to cohere in any type of way. And so this relates also to a low trust society question that I had because I do think that we're there. We have a low trust society. Congratulations, everyone. We did it. And so how do we return to that? One of the things that I've been mulling over is the idea that artists are actually the people that we need the most at this time. And as someone who dabbles in art, I feel like I'm a very undisciplined artist. Like once I do become disciplined, then I will be able to claim that title. But the 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 way that I show up in the world is in a very artistic way with that subjectivity, and I think that the benefit of that is communicating through images, and images uh, go across languages, and they carry a lot of information, but also like more than that, it's like permeable to some sort of divine space. And I feel like art has been lost for so long. So, anyway, all of that to sort of contextualize, do you think of yourself as an artist? And if so, how does that look like? Like, how does that play out in the way that you approach what you do?
Thanks for that question. That's a very good question. Yeah, I do think of it that way, but I grew up in a time where even though you sort of had, oh, you know how you can sort of listen to your parents and realize that they themselves are in this active state of rewriting or adjusting perception or something. I remember growing up at a time where you could have the muscular artist or what have you. In fact, it goes all the way back. I mean, at the very beginning, warriors, music, poets. These were all interrelated, actually. I don't know. I don't know that anyone knows the whole of the story, but we know that much is true. And so, growing up in Portland, being an artist, my parents were like practical. They are practical, sober sorts of people. That was kind of, we'd make fun of this. It's kind of a highfalutin, foofy, sort of maybe vapid idea, which is true. My experience in Portland is that most people who call themselves artists are nothing of the sort. They have no developed idea of what it is, and they've paid zero cost in order to, adopt that title. I remember my buddy, who himself is actually like maybe the most naturally gifted artist that I've ever met, can just sit down and just, draw or paint spectacular realism or style, can pick up a guitar and instantly is just like, man, I mean, the amount of soul coming out of this thing, and is a published writer, of no small repute. He gave me this little silly card when we were like 25 or something, and it was just this thing someone had mocked up, and it was like your artistic license. And it was kind of built off a driver's license, you wrote your name in there, and it was like, okay, now you're an artist. And we have done this strange thing where on the one hand, we've made it hyper technical, where the people who work at Pixar or what have you, or work with AI, are now going to be sort of like artists. And then we've hollowed out the middle and then made this huge like Hobby Lobby, Joanne Fabric, the cottage industries that are attached like barnacles to the sides of everything, whether it's guitar playing or screenwriting or novel writing. These are all just these myriad, parasitical sorts of entities playing off of vanity to try and imbue this sense of identity. Well, I am this thing. And for me, there was a little bit of a winding path to come around to realize whatever. There's a lot going on here where the artist as such has to be, in my opinion. Okay, so you have to arrive at or cultivate or just maybe be gifted with some capacity for containing the contradiction. Like, you do have to have this a sort of open-mindedness, like Jordan Peterson would talk about, but you also have to have, I think especially now, what's missing is this discipline that you mentioned. And I will maybe offer a couple of just little points to maybe kind of undergird this position that I'm taking. That was 23 years ago when I wrote that first novel. I never really stopped writing, but I actually started writing novels because I felt like I was trying to write songs, and I thought that all of them were terrible. And so even though they were technically okay, maybe they honored certain traditions or maybe even surpassed a lot of the pop songs that were popular at the time, I felt like something was missing, so I started to write novels instead. About maybe 12 years into that process, I went back to writing the songs, and they were much better. But what happened was that the two started to interplay to the point where now I have, I think, about 12 albums worth of songs that are all like they're coming at the same sort of material that Crowbar and King of Dogs are dealing with from these oblique, odd angles. And along the way, I should mention as well, the reason I thought I should write songs is because I really wanted to. I remember maybe about 18 thinking to myself, I think that being able to play guitar in a totally seamless electric guitar with all that means, I looked at it and I said, I think that's probably a peak experience that mankind can have. And I thought maybe that's worth pursuing. So I started to play guitar at about age 18. But I was coming at it from this athletic point of view. I played basketball well enough that I was given a scholarship to college, or several of them. And then I didn't, I sort of dropped that pretty quick. But I was coming at it from this kind of training, quasi sort of warrior point of view, that the day that I don't want to go work out is the day that I have to go work out, because that defines who I am. And so that was imbued into me as a kid very early and very strongly. I mean, that was the defining thing about my young life. And so it did take a while for me to transfer these things over, but I bring up the case of the 23 years ago to say endurance and persistence and discipline and all of these things, in the end, they actually, the old guy who said, it was one of the presidents, said, persistence and determination alone are omnipotent for man. And this is absolutely the case. Like that's my belief now. After doing these things for 20 some years or 25 some years, something like this, all of those cylinders now are firing for me, so they're all feeding each other. And I have wound up at a place where my subjective experience is only tempered by those voices that I allow it to be tempered by. And the number one is obviously my conception or my relationship with God. And after that, there's like a small handful of people that I'm going to allow. And this is going to sound, there's no way around this. I mean, it's just going to sound arrogant, but that's why I say I've been at this quietly on my own in poverty for 25 years. I wasn't scrambling around to sell myself on OnlyFans or to write left-wing propaganda or something. I was searching that whole time for what is true, and I arrived at things like God, in particular the Christian conception of God, and persistence and determination as like the tip of the spear in order to get to truth or value or something like that. So I don't really refer to anything like fads or traditions other than what's kind of embedded in those ways of approaching it. And I'll send it back to you. Just to say that I think that you've hit on something, and I am impressed with your apprehension of the situation vis-a-vis our like you said, like the fabric done dwindled. Like it's over. It's totally frayed, and now we have this uh, situation where something like a panopticon AI will be inserted. We're now at the point where if you haven't read Ernst Junger and sort of figured out a way to like, what was this guy saying? Because we're going to have to deal with it. And I do fear, as many of us do, that like there's going to be some sort of massive bottleneck. And I don't know what it's going to look like, my friend. Whether artists, I have a colleague, James Polos, fantastically gifted guy and a really great guy. He's written several books, one of which is called Human Forever, which I always recommend this book to anyone. You're going to have to read it a few times, but he's making the case that we're going to have to retreat and refortify the spiritual just simply to survive, and anyone who doesn't will probably be rolled over into one of many, many different types of AI or sort of technological cults. What happens after that, I'm not sure. But I bring James up at the end here just to say he points out that Christianity will survive regardless. It has to. It's the truth. Artists, however, and maybe this is the way to answer the question in total, is artists function in this in-between space, and that's always what they did. There was some sort of a shamanic element, there was a war element, there was a sacrificial element, sacrificing to higher ideals, transcendent ideals, to the craft, to the audience, what have you. That artist is on the chopping block for sure. And so here I am these 23 years later, I don't have some giant publishing deal. I think that I'm probably in a better position than I've ever been. But there's no guarantee that all of that work will be translated into something like a starter home for my kids where they could have a cat. I mean, the deal is rotten. The deal is truly rotten. And if anybody really thinks that they're going to like buy their way out of this, like, bro, no, like you're going to have to find God and find him quick.
Yeah. The episode that came out yesterday, my friend and I were talking about, well, it doesn't matter what we were talking about, but he just brought up the verse, what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his soul? And I think that that's what you're talking about. I know that you have somewhere to be, so we can wrap it up there. I think that was all beautifully said. Thank you so much for having this conversation, and the absolute best of luck to you in all of your artistic endeavors moving forward. I look forward to the first album when you finally man up and start releasing those songs, and then I will have you back on if you're willing for the next Andrew Edwards novel whenever that comes out.
Thank you very much, Ian. I appreciate it. And yeah, I'd love to come back if that's a possibility. I wish you a lot of success with your podcast, and congratulations on your expanding family.
Thanks, man. I will put links to both books in the description. Is there anything else that people can that you want people to find about you?
Most of it's on x.com. If you go up in that link tree, there's all of the links that you may be interested in. And that's about it. Thanks for listening.
All right. Thanks, Andrew.